All right, let's talk about a word everybody knows, Armageddon. It's this huge, epic word that practically screams, the end. But what if everything we think we know about it is wrong? What if the real story is something else entirely?
Yeah, when you hear Armageddon, your brain probably jumps straight to some kind of future apocalyptic war, right? You picture massive armies, a final global showdown. I mean, it's the plot of a dozen blockbuster movies.
But hang on a second. What if that's not it at all? What if the real Armageddon isn't some war we're still waiting for, but a spiritual battle that already happened? A battle that was fought and won 2,000 years ago. That kind of changes everything.
So, to figure this out, we've got to go right to the source. And what we find there is pretty surprising. It all comes down to a single, really puzzling word. Okay, so here's the first thing that might blow your mind. The word Armageddon only shows up one time in the entire Bible. Seriously, just once. For a word that's so famous, you'd think it would be everywhere. But nope, it's tucked away in this one single verse.
And this is it, the one and only mention. It talks about forces being gathered together at a specific place. But the name of that place? Well, that's where the real mystery begins. It's not as simple as it looks.
You see, the name Armageddon comes from the Hebrew Har Megiddo. Har means mount, so Mount of Megiddo. But here's the problem. There is no Mount Megiddo. It doesn't exist. Megiddo is a famous wide-open valley. That contradiction is a massive clue. It's telling us, hey, don't look for a literal place on a map. Look for a symbolic meaning.
So, if Armageddon is a symbol, what on earth does it symbolize? Well, to understand the name, you have to understand the history of the place. And it turns out, two huge historic battles were fought in the Valley of Megiddo that cast these long prophetic shadows forward in time. The first shadow comes from way back in the book of Judges. And as it says, kings came to fight right there by the waters of Megiddo. And what unfolds is a story of a totally impossible victory. So you've got this enemy commander, Sisera, who has Israel completely terrified with his 900 iron chariots. But at Megiddo, a freak storm floods the valley. The chariots get stuck in the mud, and Sisera himself ends up getting his head crushed by a woman named Jael. So the first thing Megiddo means is the decisive, head-crushing defeat of a great enemy. But that's only half the story. There's another, much darker memory tied to that same valley. Centuries later, something very different happened at Megiddo that cast a completely opposite shadow. This time, it was Israel's hero, the good King Josiah, who went to battle at Megiddo and was tragically killed. His death sent the whole nation into this deep, profound mourning that was remembered for generations. So now, the Valley of Megiddo stands for two totally contradictory things: the crushing of an evil enemy and the tragic death of a righteous king. Okay, this is the moment. This is where those two prophetic clues, the crushed enemy and the dying king, collide in one single world-changing event. The real battlefield, it turns out, wasn't Megiddo at all. It was a hill just outside Jerusalem called Golgotha. At the cross, you see both the Megiddo's shadows fulfilled perfectly. First, just like Sisera, the ultimate enemy, Satan and the powers of darkness, is totally crushed. The Apostle Paul even says that Jesus disarmed them and put them to open shame. And second, just like Josiah, the true and perfectly righteous king, Jesus, dies. The two clashing stories of Megiddo finally make sense when they meet at the cross. Now, to really get how huge this is, we have to pull the camera way back. Because this wasn't just about fulfilling Megiddo's history. This was the climax of a cosmic conflict that was promised from the very first pages of the biblical story. Way back in Genesis chapter 3, right after everything goes wrong, God makes this incredible promise. He says that one day a seed of the woman will come, and this person would suffer a wound, his heel would be bruised, but in that very act, he would deliver the fatal blow. He would crush the serpent's head. It's the Bible's very first prophecy of a suffering victor. So you can see this amazing narrative arc, right? The promise is made in Eden. Then history at places like Megiddo gives us these little previews, these shadows of what's coming. Then bam, at the cross, you get the climax. The serpent's head is crushed at the very moment the victor's heel is bruised. And the book of Revelation, it's not predicting a future Armageddon. It's announcing the results of the one that already happened at the cross. And all of this leads us to one, frankly, revolutionary conclusion. The Battle of Armageddon isn't something we're waiting for. It is a finished victory. It's already been settled.
So let's just run through it one more time. Step 1, Armageddon is a symbol, not a place. Step 2. Its meaning comes from those two shadows of Megiddo, a crushed enemy and a fallen king. Step 3. Both shadows were perfectly and completely fulfilled at the cross. Which brings us to the final point. The decisive battle is over. The victory is already won.
You know, the paradox at the heart of all this is just breathtaking. At Golgotha, it looked like evil was winning. To the outside world, it looked like the ultimate defeat. But in reality, that very moment of apparent weakness was the act that disarmed evil forever. What looked like the world's greatest tragedy was actually the greatest victory in the history of the cosmos.
So that leaves us with a final, massive question to think about. If the decisive battle has already been fought and won, if Armageddon is in our rearview mirror, what does that change about how we see our history, how we live right now, and how we look to the future?